What's up, freaks? This rip was brought to you by River. River's a Bitcoin company built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners the right way. There's no trusted third parties. They build all their infrastructure. They have free DCA because they know it's the best way to buy Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin, you want to mine Bitcoin, you want to send Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, you want to plug into their Lightning Network API. If you're a developer, they're building all these tools for you. They also encourage self-custody. Again, they're Bitcoiners. They want to provide an on-ramp for you and then teach you and encourage you to take control of your own Bitcoin. And they're doing this. It's a beautiful company. If you do hold Bitcoin on the exchange, you can know for sure, since they don't rely on any third parties, they don't lend your Bitcoin out, they don't speculate with your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is held in a multi-sig wallet with 100% reserves. Okay? So go to river.com/TFTC, take advantage of the no-fee DCA. You set up your dollar cost average. You don't pay any fees on those buys. If you're a developer, they have their Lightning Network Services API that you can build on. You can send over Lightning. You can mine via River as well. You may have your exchange. You may be comfortable with it, but have you tried River yet? It's a question you have to ask yourself. If the answer is no, go try it. That's where all the Bitcoiners are hanging out. That's where I get my Bitcoin as well. River.com/TFTC. Thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, set the notifications up as well. We're going to be putting out a lot of content this year. If you want to subscribe to the podcast feed as well, if you're not around your computer or not listening on YouTube, but you want to catch the podcast on the podcasting feeds, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, I write a newsletter almost daily during the week. Go to tftc.io, subscribe on the website, and you'll get pure signal on Bitcoin, macroeconomics, geopolitics, whatever tickles my fancy that day. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for supporting the show. If you can subscribe, rate, review, goes a long way. We're trying to blow this up in 2023. Enjoy the rip.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
Mr. Lannan with the good flow. How we doing?
Mr. Ben, I am very good. I am happy to be back. Flow is intact and ready to go.
Well, I'm very happy that you're back too. I hit you up, a couple weeks ago. I forget if we talked about it on RHR, but obviously there's a lot of noise around the real estate markets right now. The Fed is raising rates. That is affecting mortgage rates, which is affecting the ability to move houses in the U.S. housing market. It seems a bit chaotic. I figured, hey, I need to pull in Kelly to help me get a better understanding of what's going on in this market. But before we get into the current state, the first time you were on the show, gosh, it had to be a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago. It was right after I had published an essay about public bathrooms, and I made a couple jokes that got some attention. So glad to be back, though.
Well, I'm glad to have you back again. But that first conversation, not only did we talk about Bitcoin urbanism, just how messed up the zoning laws are and how it perturbs, what's the word I'm looking for? Urbanism, urban design. Yeah. That's what I was looking for, the phrase.
I guess natural development in the built environment. So
yes.
instead of I guess the built environment being a reflection of an ecology, being, that humans live in an urban space, and therefore, since we're animals, we would create our own ecology, that it's essentially top down telling you where you can put things. So I am officially the head of the Hating Central Planners United organization, and I am proud to be in that position. So, but yeah.
Some of my favorite quote tweets. This is your world on central planning.
Yeah, laughs in central planning, and it's rough out there. There's actually a lot of good news on that front. Smaller cities, larger cities, even some states are starting to ban single family zoning. I mean, they're not in places that you would expect. I believe Minnesota is one, Oregon is one, but you would think that places like Texas or Arizona, which has stronger property rights, would be leading that charge, but it's actually not, which is quite interesting. But another big one is eliminating parking minimums, because that's like the bane of urban existence, so to speak.
Yeah, Austin seems to be a pretty unpleasant urban existence now, as the city's seems to be outgrowing its infrastructure. They're putting up a bunch of phallic buildings here in the middle of the city, and getting to work is a big pain in the ass. Yeah,
well, they do. They call them podiums, so they're glass office buildings on top of like 20 levels of parking. Most people don't know one of the most expensive things to do when you're building a building or really doing anything is digging up dirt. So when you're excavating to build a parking garage, that can basically double the cost per parking space just to dig a hole in the ground. So people who avoid it. But when you're walking around like downtown Austin, like you see it. There's 20 levels of parking, and then the office building is built on top of that. So, and to your point about exacerbated infrastructure, it's like, when you have these boom and busts, you model parking or transit or cars based on the current formulas, right, or the current knowledge. But if you build the equivalent of 5,000 new parking spaces for buildings, where those 5,000 cars got to go somewhere, and typically cities are always playing catch up in order to make that happen, because construction takes time. All this planning takes time, and it has to be approved, reviewed. Everybody likes to think that their house will just pop up in 6 months. But it's like, that's true. I'll build it in 6 months, but all the work required before that takes years.
From like permitting and actually acquiring the supplies needed.
Yeah, I mean, not so much. Acquiring the supplies needed, it hasn't been as bad as it was before. Up to, I guess you could say, the end of 2022. 2020 through 2022 was absolutely awful for procuring anything. I guess the easiest way to describe it is you could buy something. Like we were buying, a good example is shower bypass doors. So instead of stepping over a tub or having like curtains for a shower, you have like a glass door. We ordered all of this stuff for one of our projects, and not one of the sets matched the color of the other set. Now, keep in mind, we ordered like champagne bronze, which is kind of like, it looks like gold. But none of them matched. There was no piece that matched. So you're getting stuff where there's no quality control, because they're just getting it out the door, and then you're literally just stuck with it because there's nowhere else to go. So,
well, that was one of the things I wanted to lead with, because the last time you were on, you were talking about just how terrible the supply chains were. So they've improved a bit, but the quality control has gone down.
Well, quality controls come back up. I say it's probably standard now, but I mean, it's still hard to get stuff. I think there was enough complaints about like, don't ship me crap, that it stopped. But yeah, I mean, overall, it is getting a little easier to find everything. I mean, lumber is down. I just saw a stat, lumber's down almost 70% from the high. So you measure lumber in 1,000 board feet, and it got up to like 1735, I think it was, and now it's down to 365.
That's good. So, that's good, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, but it's also, a forward indicator, I guess, for what we're going to talk about. It's a forward indicator of like what's going on in the business. So, when lumber shoots from where it is now all the way up to over 1,700 back down to where it is, it's like, okay, hold on. Now, like, trees take time to grow, and you have all the manufacturing process that goes into that. And then, like, when I order it, or when everybody orders all at once, price goes through the roof, right? But, like a typical supplier, like you ramp up production or you ramp up new inventory in order to meet demand, thinking that that's going to be going forward. So now, I don't want to say everybody's left holding the bag, but there's definitely, like, we had leftover lumber. There's lots of people who are trying to renegotiate contracts that are not having a fun time right now. So
yeah, locked it in at a higher price. It's finally time to deliver, and they're like, actually, I'd like to pay less for this. But
yes.
Let's jump into like the current state of the market as it pertains to like mortgage rates, commercial real estate. Like I mentioned, Austin has a shit ton of new construction going on with high rises in the middle of the city. Facebook was the lead anchor tenant in one of these buildings, and they pulled out late last year. So they're still building that building, and their anchor tenant, one of the largest corporations in the world, said, actually, we're not going to buy or rent that real estate anymore. Rates are high, mortgage rates are high. You have people like Blackstone defaulting on commercial real estate funds that they have or bonds. That was last week. But before that, late last year, they prevented some of their investors and one of their BREITs from, not one of their investors, they had to pause redemptions on that BREIT fund, particularly, I believe BlackRock had a similar problem. Like, it seems that the Fed stepping in and raising rates as quickly and as aggressively as they have over the last year and a half is really throwing a wrench in real estate markets, both residential and commercial. What are you seeing on your end?
You are absolutely right. So I guess the easiest way to think about it is tying back in timelines into real estate development. So you buy a piece of land, you have to get it entitled. That means, you go to your city and make sure that I'm allowed to build, an apartment complex, 50 units, or, I can build like a drive-through Dutch Brothers, right? So there's a whole process associated with that. And that could take, if you have to rezone something, that could take, depending on your market, 12 to 18 months. So you're looking at a piece of property. Let's say it's November 2021, the day before Jay Powell announces that he's going to take, rates to the moon. So you've got your signed LOI, or let's say you're even further along. You have a purchase contract and you are in escrow. So the clock is ticking and you need to figure out if you can get done what you need to get done. So that takes you 12 to 18 months, and you're here right now. Mortgage rates are 7%, or the Fed funds rate is just under 5%. I think it's like, what's the range? Like 4.5 to 7.
It's like, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
So the Fed funds rate has tripled since then, and now you're looking at your model and you're like, holy cow! Like, does this math even work? Do we need to think about syndicating this, or do we need to restructure all of our finances for, or not our finances, our model for a long-term hold? Like, how do we do this? Now, don't get me wrong. There's still development happening all across the country. It's just not as much. So when you're jacking up rates that fast, instead of, let's say, 25 bips every 2 months, it's in real estate, that's like spinning on a dime. Moving in a year is spinning on a dime, or trying to get new entitlement is just almost, the amount of brain damage that it would be to try and get, let's say, more product in order to make a piece of land work in today's environment. Like, you just wouldn't do it. So things are definitely slowing down. People are holding on to whatever their property is, whether it's commercial or residential. Like, if people own homes, I have a bunch of buddies that own homes under 3% mortgage rates. And they're just like, A, where am I going to go? And B, why on earth would I sell when I have a buddy who works at a bank who's got a 2.25 30-year mortgage, 2.25% 30-year mortgage. So, these people are never going anywhere. And then the commercial guys, as long as they can hold their debt through this period and refinance, they're like, well, I got 7 years to figure it out, or I got 10 years or 15 years, whatever it is. So there's definitely a lot of pencil sharpening going on. But at the same time, if you are in a position where you've owned something or you bought something 2 years ago, then you're probably just going to sit on your hands. Would you do new deals? Not nearly as much. So a lot of the brokers that I've talked to, their traffic or their deal flow has dropped 75 to 90%, but there's still stuff coming through the door. But I guess, when you think about it, or if you're listening, you're thinking about it, it sounds like, oh, wow, that's crazy. It's like, no, the real crazy part is how crazy things were the last 2 years up till now. Like absolutely bonkers. So we are below, what normal activity would be, especially for like single family homes or apartments. Not so much. We're probably right around the baseline. Commercial development's definitely slowed down, at least in the research I've done and the buddies and stuff that I've talked to in the market. So, there's a lot of pain that's happening, but at the same time, there's a lot of people just sitting on their hands. So there's not I wouldn't say there's a happy medium. It's definitely a no man's land. The bid-ask spread is huge, and just people aren't doing anything.
Well, I think that's my big question is like how long do a subset of the market of people who own homes and have these low rate mortgages locked in, like especially if you consider like the layoffs that have been going on in the tech sector, like is there the potential that we're just in the eye of the volatility storm in real estate where at some point, maybe later this year, next year, we'll reach a point where so many people have been taken out of the job market and they don't have the ability to service their mortgage. They're forced to sell their home. They got it in 2020, 2021 when the money printer was on. They thought it was going to keep going forever. That has obviously changed and it's affecting the job market now. Do you see that being a catalyst for some that spread in the bid ask getting compressed lower?
In that regard, not necessarily. Now, I do see, let's say a lot of the tech sector are responsible for the work from home, basically flight from cities. So if you're in San Francisco, you left for Idaho or Montana or some of these other places, and you just lost your highfalutin job. Now, are you going to try and sell? Or are you going to try and get a new work from home job? Like, sure. But if you're not able to do that, then you've got to move back to where all the action's happening. So some of these people may take losses on their homes trying to get out. It kind of just depends. Now you have to remember, these people are moving from very expensive areas to very, I don't want to say like cheap. That's not the right word, but
relatively cheap.
Relatively cheap compared to them. So and this is very true in Arizona, where like 85% of the buyers coming from out of state are putting down huge amounts of cash for their down payment. So their loan to values are way lower than, what a normal loan might be for the average person in the average town in these areas. So can they take a hit and move back? Maybe, sure. But what's kind of going on, especially in the single family residential market, is that it's kind of creeping down slowly. So it may be nationally like 1 to 2% a month, but that's kind of just everybody ignoring the fact that they really need to move or they really need to do something, right? So they're like, well, I'll sell it, but I don't need to take a huge haircut. There is some of that. Now, will like tech people moving out of their homes and selling it bring down comps in the neighborhood? Like, absolutely. Is that going to affect everybody else? No, not necessarily. If everybody else starts losing their jobs and they get foreclosed out, like, you better believe it. But from the data that I've seen and that I've reading, it's not as large of a subset as you would think, and that the quantities are still so small relative to all the other homeowners that have purchased, especially with we'll just say sub 4% rates, that they're more likely to just be one-offs than affecting the whole market to bring everything down. Now, will there be like concentrated neighborhoods where stuff like that happens? Like, sure. But from what I'm reading and what I think, I don't think it's enough to take the whole ship down with it. So, but like I said, it's kind of two extremes. There's a lot of people that are very happy with what they were able to get as far as refinancing homes and sit in their home forever. And then there's lots of people that, maybe got a mortgage in the 4s or the 5s that are kind of like, okay, well, if home prices keep coming down, 1% a month or whatever, and after 2-3 years, which we would be, I guess we'd only be about 6 to 8 months into the first leg of the downturn, so to speak. But you know, it's out there, but it's not as big of a concern for, especially a lot of the research that I've seen.
So what you're saying is like, it's worse out there for people trying to buy new homes for the first time right now, obviously. Because rates are so high.
New home buyers are just totally screwed. Like if you're so I'm 35, so if you're younger, essentially 35 or younger, first of all, if you're a millennial, 35% or younger, there's 1 in 4 of us that still live at home with mom and dad. So think about that. That's almost 20 million people, right? So, you know, what are they doing? They're still at home. They're not paying rent, or they're paying rent to mom and dad, whatever it is. And they still don't have, even with that subsidized, you know, I guess rent, so to speak, they're still not able to save up enough, or do they make enough in order to afford a home at 7% rates? So I think they're like 6.95 right now. But, you know, I was looking at some of the matrices that people have put together of, you know, what's a 3% rate versus a 7% rate do for A, your down payments, B, your monthly payments, which is really what's most important. In some cases, it's double the payment than it was 2 years ago. A lot of times it's between 50 and 75% more. So if you had, you know, if you could qualify for a $2,000 a month mortgage 2 years ago, that same mortgage is now $3,000. So a 50% increase in the cost of, you know, just shelter alone. It's like, oh, okay, well, everybody's rethinking this. You know, cancellation rates in Q4 or through Q4, at least in the Southwest, which is basically Phoenix and Vegas, was 45%. So almost half of every contract that these home builders had for a home canceled. So what does that mean? I mean, if you're a home builder, you have certain things that you can do. You can offer incentives. You can buy down the buyer's mortgage rate. So you can essentially write a check to lower it from, let's say, 5 to 4%, just spitballing, you know, to help out the buyer. The buyer buys the house at the price that you want. You move inventory. Everybody's happy, right? So there's games that can be played. And I don't want it to, games is not like a negative term. It's just like there's things that you can do to help the buyers, offer incentives, and to sell a home.
That comes out of your top line, right?
Yes, it does. So it becomes like a rational calculation. How much do we want to pay to sell this house? You know, to get it off the inventory, either we get our money back, we make less on margin, you know, that's fine. It is what it is. A lot of these guys are thinking that, you know, it's a redux of 2008 or the great financial crisis, which not necessarily so for different reasons, but you know, they're all kind of like looking around, and I heard it described on a podcast as clearing the decks, which is probably pretty accurate. You know, starts are when I was reading the home builder stats for Central Phoenix, starts were down like 35% from last January through last December. So there's a lot of people pumping the brakes and trying to prevent basically they aren't starting new homes is what it's coming down to. They have all sorts of inventory. As soon as you pour a slab to start a home, like, you don't stop. You finish it and you go from there. So, but Marty, if you have the ability, like right now, if you've been renting or saving cash or whatever, you know, I would sit on your hands, because there's a lot of people thinking that, you know, this 1% to 2% drop in home prices, you know, that's happening every month is going to turn into like 5 or 10 real quick. Now, it's not like doom and gloom. It's just that, okay, so now there's some people that have to sell and they are going to get aggressive about it. Or there's investors that need to sell and they're going to get aggressive about it. You know, one of those groups is like the short-term renters, the Airbnb folks. I can't tell you, it's almost a running joke in Scottsdale about how many Airbnbs some of these realtors have. Some of them are 15 to 20, right? And
these
the
are the
Super Bowl
people,
is just here.
These are the people we see on TikTok, investors teaching you how to run a real estate portfolio.
Yeah, the guy's making videos where it sounds like a Ponzi scheme, where you could take equity out of your new rental property and roll it into that property, and then, you know, from property B to property C to property D. Yeah, those guys. Unbelievable.
No, it's as somebody who has not purchased a home yet, would like to buy, a home and some land. It's like that's the mentality I've sort of adopted over the last 6 months. It's like, all right, something's got to happen here. Like, rates are too high. Inflation still relatively high. Yes, it's falling on a month-to-month basis, but that lower CPI print is working off a higher base from last year when it was double-digit inflation. Like, it seems like there's some turbulence on the horizon. Again, it just goes into something we discussed in the first time you were on the show, which is like the boom bust cycles that exist, particularly in real estate. And it seems like what you were mentioning there is like new starts are beginning to dry up all throughout the country. Like, what I'm trying to get at is like, how do we just throw a wrench in this boom bust cycle? Like, is Jay Powell going to start pivoting at some point towards the end of this year, maybe next year, and then, all right, floodgates open, start building again? Like, how do we stop this cycle?
Marty, I'm glad you asked. There's this technology called Bitcoin, okay? And we get rid of all of these people making all of these decisions for everybody else when it comes to the price of risk. As far as it goes, so Lynn Alden had to tweet, I don't know, I think it was in December, basically saying that the average spread between the 10-year and the 30-year mortgage is about 300 basis points, so about 3%. So like right now we're topping out, or we had topped out about 3.5%. And now the expectations, or basically the inflation misses that have happened in like the last month, 30-year rates have rocked back up from just under 6 to just under 7. So it's a lot. You can reprice assets a lot faster than like you can build assets, right? So we're in this position now where home building starts are cut in half and declining, to the position where even if they pivot in 2 weeks because the wind blows a different direction, like whatever the reason is, then we're back in the same position that we were. We had no supply, and we have all this demand. Especially now, we have all this demand that's been waiting around for over a year because rates are up, and then we haven't built anything for the last year. So you get back into the same problem we had, where prices went up 30 to 40% depending on where you are, and only a certain number of people can afford them anyways. So if you're a first-time home buyer, like, you would think that like, I don't own a house, but I don't own a house. I've been doing this for too long. I don't mind renting. I'm sitting around. I'd rather stack Bitcoin than equity in a home. But if you haven't built any new inventory, where are all these people going to go? Where are the 20 million millennials that live with their parents going to go? What about all the Gen Xers? What about all these other people that want to get out of California, for instance? So I think personally, rates will start coming down definitely by the end of the year. There's too many small indicators that are basically just flying all over the place. Costs are dropping fast in lumber, which is a forward-looking deal. I like to, everybody has like a heuristic, right? Where they talk to a neighbor or they have a family member or something where they're like, this just doesn't seem right. When everything is, you definitely know everything's wonky, or like when everything's crazy, they're like, hey, have you ever heard of,
Ripple?
Ethereum? It's like, no, yeah, Ripple, whatever. And it's like, okay, here we go. Now we're at the top. I got to start putting, guarding myself. But I was talking to, I don't want to rat him out. We'll say a family friend. And he was kind of like, he's not financially inclined. He doesn't know anything about Bitcoin. But he was just like, Kelly, it's so weird that they say everything's great. And these top line numbers like CPI and unemployment are getting better and all this stuff. But then I just look around and all of these small things I notice are just getting absolutely worse. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. It's like the shiny object syndrome, right? They want you to look at a big shiny object, but don't look at all of the small things that are going wrong. And it's a very Keynesian fiat thinking to think that like all of these other inputs, like they matter. They play into the larger inputs. And depending on, how you want to cook the books, if you're, at the Bureau of Labor, it just, you can make these numbers look how you want. But I'm inclined to talk to my heuristics and see what what's going on. So I think that they're going to be forced to lower rates. I think eventually, all of these small things breaking, are going to, finally break something big to get enough attention to be like, okay. And then what are they going to do? They're going to take rates down 100 bips per meeting, and we're going to be back to zero, before you know it. It's so hard to predict, though.
It is. You're, like you said, hopefully more and more people become attuned to this great technology called Bitcoin, where we don't have to worry about the whims of JPEL and crew, and just organize economy around a protocol that is very predictable. But going back to the heuristics that your family friend was talking about, like what are some of the examples that he was pointing out?
It's basically, one of them was going shopping at the grocery store, and basically like the hardware store. And it's so much that like, eggs are up, beef is up, some things are down a little bit, but it's more about everything's a little bit harder to get. So like in the state of Arizona, raw milk is like legal. You can just go buy it. So I'm a big fan, and I buy, just like a half gallon whenever it's available, but it hasn't been available in almost 3 weeks. So now I know that when it becomes available, whoever else has seen it, like me, is buying 2 or 3, right? So then the shelves go empty again. So then the expectation of, should I buy this now, or am I going to have to wait another month? And with him, it was like he does a lot of stuff around the house. He's a little bit older, and he was like, I go to the Ace Hardware or wherever, and some things are more expensive, definitely, but it's not just that. It's more expensive, and I get less of the items. So like if he's buying wall hangers, right, instead of getting 15 per pack, maybe he's getting 10, but the price still went up 20%. Well, that's actually not a 20% increase, because you got a third of the quantity for 20% more, right? So that's a huge price increase. And, it's basically, he was just saying it's like the little things. Like you just normally wouldn't really think about it. It's harder to do things. You go places, everybody, is a little angrier or little spicy. Everybody's kind of thrown in this giant pressure cooker. It's like the frog in the pot. Everybody's thrown in this giant pressure cooker, and it slowly gets turned up by inflation. And there's no real like precipice that anybody can put their finger on, but you just kind of feel it. And that's how this guy was kind of trying to explain it, which I'm trying to relay how he felt. But I would even say it in my own life, like buying things, it's getting fewer for more, and the quality is definitely just not the same. It's just, inflation is just nasty.
Completely agree. Like going out to dinner, is shocking now. Like cost per head at a meal is probably like, where like a couple years ago it was like $50. It was like, this is a little steep. Now it's like $70, $80, sometimes $100, depending on where you go. If you want to get a bottle of wine or something like that, you go out, you swipe your card, you're like, what the fuck did I just do? Like I just spent.
100%. I was my girlfriend and I went to dinner for Valentine's Day or whatever, and we went to like a nicer place. We were expecting to spend like $100 and $100 a head or whatever, and that was like the only sit down, and we're like, holy shit, like what like I didn't look this up online. Did you look this up online? She's like, no. We're like, oh man. Get the bill, comes around, and we're like, okay, so that was a very nice dinner. We're gonna have to sit out for a month or two on this kind of thing, but it's just like, I do I line up like I run my own business, self-employed, so I line item all my own meals and entertainment expenses. And even my accountant was like, Kelly, what are you doing? It's like, I didn't do anything. I reduced the quantity of times I went out by almost 20%. And my cost per head, just like you said, I think it went up like 48%. And I was like, okay, well, that's, my goodness. It's, I'm not doing anything significantly different than I have in the past. And it just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And like you said, like the BLS, the federal government, they game all these numbers, because that's like something I've been paying closer attention to, particularly with like the CPI print. Everybody's like, oh, inflation's on its way back down towards 2%. Maybe it doesn't get there. Maybe it hovers around 4, but it's like, it's not actually like 6.8 or whatever the recent prints are. And then you're actually seeing, many people don't catch this because they do their adjustments like a couple months after, but they readjusted November and December CPI print higher. Like you're just like, oh, by the way, like back in November, December, those numbers were a little lower. Let's adjust them higher. But even the higher adjustment does not factor in what we're describing. It's like, I believe my lying eyes. Like I'm going to the restaurant and I'm paying 50% more than I was this time last year or 2 years ago. Yeah. It's very visible.
Even if you look at the shadow stats, the shadow stats calculator where it uses the 1980 base CPI before they took, a hatchet and just absolutely obliterated that formula. Like it was running in the teens. It may still be in the teens. I forgot to check, but it was running in the teens like all last year. And it's like, yeah, that about feels right to me. Like my expenses are changing 10 to 20%. Like,
yeah. And there's other little heuristics too. Like I see it on Twitter every once in a while, like people who are driving for Uber Eats or DoorDash or driving Uber, like they're getting visibly angry, like on these videos on TikTok or whatever, saying like really getting pissed off at people for not tipping enough. Like they're expecting people on top of their ride to like tip significantly because they think that people should know they're not making that much money. Which is like, I like first 7-8 years I used Uber, like never even thought about tipping. Thought it was like baked in, and thought every Uber driver was happy with what they were making. And now you're seeing that type of gig economy worker getting really stressed.
Yeah. Well, speaking of gig economy and the Fed and the BLS, it's like, they say everything's fine in employment. Unemployment's like sub 4%, but they keep forgetting to bring up the fact that like the quantity of people who now have 2 or 3 jobs, whether part-time or, gigs, is up something like like 50 or 60%. So all of these people who are having a hard time making ends meet, all they're doing is working more. And nobody thinks to mention that? Like, it's not, obviously it doesn't promote their narrative. They have no incentive to tell anybody this, but it's like when you look at the numbers of quantity of people working more and more jobs, it's like, what, you can only work so much. Like even if you were, a Wall Street banker working 80 to 100 hours a week for 10 years, like there's lots of guys that crack, even developers that I know have worked hours like that. And after like 10 or 15 years, like they just fall off the cliff. So and you can, and the older that you get, especially if you're a senior citizen, think about being a senior citizen right now and seeing M2 go up. What was 2021? It went up like 28%. Like, how are you going to work yourself out of that one? Like, you really can't. I think I can't remember who posted it, but like the average 401k balance is like $100,000. So
that's not going to last anybody.
No,
any amount of time.
No, not when your average M2 increase in the last like 20 years is like just over 8%, something like that. It's like, dude, we are all in trouble.
Yeah, and like bring it back to real estate. I saw a crazy stat on Twitter the other week that made me laugh, not out of like jeer, but pure like, holy shit, this is insane. It was like if the average millennial making a median salary wanted to save up enough to put 10% down on a mortgage, they'd have to save 10% of their paycheck for 10 years. So like just for a 10% down payment with the rates going up, like, yep. And I can't even believe that statistic, because you look at the median income, it's like $41,000 after taxes and all your other disposable income expenses. Like it seems like that, even that 10% for 10 years for 10% down payment is a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, and when you compound that with the student debt that millennials have, it's like, the debt slavery is a real thing. So if prices are going up, or let's say that like they have the last 3 years, they go up 40%, and interest rates then start cranking up. Now you're at 7%, and you got to put down, your 10%. So let's say the average price is like $500,000. It's like $470, but for easy math. So you got to put down 50 grand just to start, right? And your mortgage payment is going to be probably about, I think it was like $3,000 a month. So if you already only had $40,000 left after everything, and you have, normal working job and all this other stuff, that's $36,000, right? That would be your mortgage payment for the year. So what about like clothes and food and, a beer with Marty after the pod, something like that? Like what, where do these things come? Like, how does it happen? It doesn't happen. It's just simple math. And, it's no wonder. Like, I think like the Zoomers doom post on TikTok about like living in the shed in their parents' yard forever. And it's like, yeah, buddy, like, hate to tell you, but that's kind of where things are trending. It's not fun, And as a developer, it just drives me absolutely nuts. So like, what I want to do, I want to build things in the built environment. I want to make homes or build or offices or whatever it is, commercial space, residential space, retail space, all of that stuff. Like that stuff interests me. But like, I want to provide that service. That's the value that I provide in my profession. But it's like, I'm hamstrung by A, like rates, B, central planning garbage from various places. But, how does a guy like me help somebody like that? I want to build like a good quality product that'll last for 30 to 40 years so that people like that can find use in it, find value, and they're willing to pay me. Like that's a legitimate, as far as I'm concerned, that's a legitimate use of my time. But, how do you do that? How do you do that right now? I was talking with my dad last week, and he's been doing this for 35 years. So he describes this area, or essentially this point in time in the cycle, as like no man's land, right? So you look at all the new deals that come across your desk, you model them out, how much, what would you have to pay an investor? What's it going to cost you to borrow the money? All these basic things you throw into the model. And you're just looking around and you're like, man, something's got to give, because nobody's going to do anything with this. Like construction prices definitely have to come down because they went up so high. But even land prices need to come down. So we're still in the phase where it's like nobody's really accepting reality or believing that things need to change to the downside, right? So they still think that their land's worth what it was worth, a year ago, or that, they can definitely grind down their subs to save 10 or 15% on the budget. But it's like, a lot of times the subs, if you ask, or when you ask them, for a haircut to take off, 5% of the top, they'll send you their materials quotes, and they're just like, where? You show me where on this piece of paper that you see 5% fluff, and it just doesn't exist. So, basically costs got to come down, mortgage rates or Fed funds rates got to come down. Mortgage rates definitely have to come down just for activity in general. So even if you wanted to buy a home, there's just not a whole lot of inventory that is in demand. So
now this is, in my mind, where things get really scary, because again, like we've been mentioning, even though CPI is lower, like we believe our lion eyes, we're going eating dinner, we're buying stuff at hardware store, getting less for more money. It's very obvious to me that inflation is out of control, even though it's not being reported accurately. And this is something I wrote a thread about over the weekend and discussed on Rabbit Hole Recap last week and a show that we posted this morning. But it seems like we're in the beginning of that hyperinflation stage, where you can easily see a situation where everything that we've been describing as it pertains to the real estate market, commercial retail construction of that market, seems to be pointing like things, rates need to come down to like stoke this market. And what I worry about is that when they inevitably do come down, who knows when, later this year, next year, 2025, who knows? But like the Fed is not going to have inflation under control, and they're going to be lowering rates and printing and just exacerbating that problem, which is a very scary proposition to think about.
Yeah. And I think a good thing to mention too is that, like, you know, inflation isn't always just it's the increase in quantity supply of money, but right when you start breaking things, there is no amount of money that can make that can make lumber arrive to my job site. Right. So if things start breaking fundamentally because inflation makes it not worth anybody's time, let's say that, you know, a low margin item that I need for a house is, you know, like my plumbing fixtures. Right. And if it becomes just too expensive from a base materials point of view to put something together to make a faucet and then try to sell that faucet, then you're going to stop selling faucets. Right. And then if J. Powell lowers rates a year from now and I need a faucet, well, guess what? There's no amount of money that I can have that's going to get me a faucet. So, you know, that just drives up the price of whatever else is available. So, you know, it's just like you can destroy demand, but you're also destroying supply at the same time. Not to mention supply lines are still semi messed up, and it just gets out of hand really fast. And I absolutely agree with you that we're kind of in, and having read things like Adam Fergus's book,
How Money
about
Dies.
Weimar. Yeah, How Money Dies. I think I've read that like 3 times. It's just absolutely fascinating because I'm trying to read it to figure out, like, where are we right now? And we're kind of at the point where it's like, okay, some things are everything is definitely more expensive, but some things are just harder to get. And if you can get them, they're just more expensive and coming from somewhere else. So I think we're definitely getting to the point of no return where it's like, okay, like with my raw milk, like it's literally just within the state because you can't transport it across state lines. And it hasn't been in the store for 3 weeks. So does that mean that it's no longer ever coming in? Or when it comes, is it going to be $20 instead of $5? And it's just, Marty, I'm worried. I think this, I don't want to, you know, incidentally segue this, but it's just like when I think about the Bitcoin urbanism stuff, you know, cities used to be able to take care of themselves. Like they had surrounding areas that were either farms or farms for both, I guess, agriculture and for livestock, right? They could take care of themselves, and then they exported whatever was left over, right? So we had this country where we were basically on this giant landmass. We could transport and trade with everybody. You know, goods went to all sorts of different places. And then as far as I'm concerned, basically like the Fed's 30, or not the Fed, but the federal government's 30-year mortgage plans basically screwed that up. And then you combine that with all the available credit and subsidies in order to build suburbia. And you literally just built a subdivision where you needed to grow food. So what does that mean? You know, just makes everything more difficult to get if you can get it at all. You know, it's just like globalism was nice for everybody until they realized that, you know, I can't grow food in my backyard now.
Yeah.
So what is that? I think that's like what I worry about. I go for walks around my neighborhood and look at ugly houses, and I just think to myself, like, man, like Scottsdale used to be a highly productive agricultural city, like lots of Phoenix was. We live in the Salt River Valley, so think about like the Nile flooding the desert, and you know you can grow. There's copper, citrus, or not. You don't grow copper. There's the 5 C's of Arizona. So it's cattle, copper, citrus, cotton, and climate. So climate's not related to that, but you know we used to grow just all sorts of stuff. But you know what do you do when your 600 square mile landmass is now covered in pavement and roofs? What do you grow? How can you grow?
you grow people who are complaining about the state of the world and their ability to get along. And
they're over here on a podcast trying to figure it out. At least two of them.
Well, yeah, God, I don't want to get too doomer, but it does seem like we're in no man's land, like your dad was describing it. Like, I do not have confidence in the ability of the Fed or the federal government to produce the soft landing that they keep talking about. And again, they actually are beginning to talk about it less, which would signal that maybe they can see the writing on the wall, know that things are going to get a bit hairy. And in parallel with that, like, there's other signals that are signaling that this may be the case, predominantly the war drum beating for World War III, whether it be supporting Ukraine in their war against Russia, or saber rattling against China, which seems to be heating up. It seems that the powers that be are beginning to try to divert attention toward war to create an excuse to turn back on the money printer or destroy demand in another way.
Yeah, and I think, if we want to keep it, in the same vein with real estate, thinking about, being in China, most people's like savings are essentially in real estate because they don't trust the government. I mean, why would you, obviously? But the notion that they have these ghost towns or these ghost cities with all this stuff and people are buying them, Evergrande going BK, and all they're doing is just saying, okay, we'll guarantee this, we'll guarantee that, or, we'll make payments on your behalf. So a lot of people don't realize that a lot of Chinese real estate buyers will buy like a condo in a tower before it's actually even built. So you got to put down 50% of the cost, and then the builder builds it, and then you pay the rest. So somebody's out 50% while that building is going up. Now, if the builder runs out of money because, he got tired of bribing the local politicians, which is, part of the gig, it's part of the game, then your half-finished building that you paid a condo paid for is worthless. It's not there. You can't use the space. There's no value in it. It's a concrete square. There's no utilities. It's not even finished. There's no windows, right? So it's the degree to which stuff like that is going on, leads right into what you're saying. It's let's rattle some sabers. Look over here. Don't worry about that finished building. We'll guarantee that. Here's your check. It's okay, well, there's second and third order consequences of just doing stuff like this. You're papering over a problem now that is going to turn into a volcano in a month. So it's just, or whenever the focus comes back around to hey, where's my condo? Or where's my check? Yeah.
And we're on the sixth or seventh layer of paper mache on top of a problem that started decades ago.
Well, and if you live in a place like China, when they just say, nope. So when do I get my house? Nope. When do I get my check? Oh, nope. It's in the mail.
Here, download this app.
What do you do?
Download this app. We'll airdrop you some yuan. You have to spend it in 2 weeks. You can only spend it here.
Unreal. Yeah. So here's your deposit back for your house. You have 3 days to spend it, or it's gone. It's what? That is just listen, from my perspective of being a grug boy and not a think boy, I just say to myself, I don't even know, what are the implications of something like that? How do you, what? Tell somebody that they can't have their deposit back, but here you go, here's some money, but you got to spend it in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Don't think it can't come here, freaks. If our government can figure out a way to make it happen, I wouldn't be surprised that they would. But let's get to some theoretical, more optimistic talk, which is, you are the Bitcoin urbanism guru. I brought you on this show today to talk about real estate because you're immersed, not in the selling of it, but the construction of real estate, commercial and retail, what is a way, like, let's paint a picture of a potential soft landing by incorporating Bitcoin into the world of real estate or just into the economy more generally? Like, do you think if people were to wake up, understand that Bitcoin is here, is extremely useful, and can help facilitate a soft landing, that it actually could? Like, is there any way from a financial perspective that Bitcoin can sort of help people, whether it be people selling or buying homes?
I think the idea would be that the people most likely to, I guess, move, like to go down this path would be the people that A, can't afford a home, or B, are on the verge of affording a home but don't know if they want to do it, because just think, they're just like, well, everything's up, everything's down, and it's all moving really fast. Like, should we really do this? And I think that the best case is that those people kind of find Bitcoin and realize that, like, if we are thinking along the lines of a store of value, and we can objectively define what a good store of value is, Bitcoin is much better than real estate. But it's like, now hold on, like, it's not like, I can hear, I think I hear Gigi posting in the background of real estate is a shitcoin. But it's like, you've got to live somewhere. You may not need to buy a home, but you can still rent something and live somewhere. Now, will it be more expensive than you would like? Sure. But I think over time, the best thing that people in this situation can do is realize that Bitcoin is a much better store of value. It might be better to buy Bitcoin instead of putting down a deposit for a home or trying to build equity in a home, because the equity in your home is literally just, it's unrealized gains. It doesn't exist until somebody buys it. So like all these boomers with mansions in all of these areas think that they have all this wealth, right? But it doesn't exist until somebody buys it. So why take that risk? Why take that risk? Now, if it's done over time, which I think it will be, I don't think it's going to be like some catastrophic deal like, oh my gosh, real estate is worth nothing anymore, buy Bitcoin instead. I think it's more like, okay, well, we know that the store value angle is much better with Bitcoin than it is with real estate. So instead of throwing all of our money all at once into real estate, we're going to slowly put it into Bitcoin and essentially slowly bleed the demand for real estate in that fashion, right? It's not, in the fashion I mean that, like, it's an argument that it's your largest investment that you're ever going to make, right? The emotional drawstrings that realtors or whoever want to use in order to get people to buy a home. Now, like, don't get me wrong. Of course, there's demand to buy in a single family home. Like, I would like to live there one day, but that doesn't mean that it has to happen, right away. So I think that the best case scenario is that real estate slowly bleeds out its value, or I guess its value premium as a store value. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, that's kind of just for like the single family home, because it's a durable consumer good, right? You're buying it for shelter. You just want to make the shelter your home, right? So there's an emotional appeal to that. It's not necessarily, in my opinion, it's not an investment. It's only an investment because you allegedly make a return, because Jay Powell lowers the rates enough to where it's just, people can afford more with their monthly payments. So now, like, as applied to everything else, my opinion generally, especially with Bitcoin urbanism, is that there is no underlying basis for which development is priced over a long period of time. So this harkens back to a lot of like what Strong Towns and Chuck Marohn talks about, where it's like, okay, and I know this because I build it, I get it. Like I read all this stuff, read his books, freaks, and it was like, yes, absolutely. All of this stuff has to be replaced. Entropy is a real thing, right? Your water pipes are going to break in your house just as they are outside in the street, right? All of these utilities, all these things have to be replaced. Now, how do you calculate How do you calculate fixing that road or replacing that building or that light pole, into the future? How do you do it when the quantity supply of money goes up by 8% every year? But remember, at the same time, that 8% doesn't end up distributed evenly. So if cost of construction goes up 30% like it did in the last 2 years, like all of your municipal budgets for replacing things the next 5 years are totally trashed. Like totally trashed. So if you have a money that can be printed at whim, like how on earth do you maintain a budget for a city? Right? How does a city even calculate like how much it's going to cost to repair a sidewalk in 6 months or a year or 5 years from now? So like these are the things that cities need to be thinking about, or people need to be thinking about when, they're at their local zoning meeting complaining about a new development or the density of a new development or whatever it is. So all of these things in the built environment have a cost, right? And they have a cost now when they're built, and they have a cost in their future, because entropy is a thing. It exists. Everything falls apart slowly over time and must be replaced. So just like we need more and more energy to maintain our current standard of living, you need more and more infrastructure in order to maintain your existing cities. It's like it's not hard. People are not going to stop having babies. People are not going to stop voting with their feet or moving around. Like you've got to be able to adjust and keep up, but at the same time, like you've got to know that, you got to be able to afford to replace all of those things that need to be replaced throughout time. So, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Marty, I just want to build mid-rise buildings that are very highly aesthetic. Instead of this background, I want to have something else. I can tell you that.
Well, you're gonna have to wait till we get to a Bitcoin standard, because these problems are pervasive. I mean, personally, I've experienced this in my life just on a micro level in the last week. Like, we rent our house. Our house was built in the 70s, and we had somebody come do some work on our pipes in our bathroom, and they had to go under the house, and they looked at the pipes. They're like, these all need to be replaced. Like, yeah. I don't know. Yeah. And it's going to be very expensive, and I don't think the owner of the house realizes that. And it's when you think about it, like at a micro level, on a house by house basis, like you need all that maintenance, but then expanding it to city by city, state by state, it is a very precarious situation we find ourselves in. And Chuck Marohn really drives that home in Strong Towns. Like Kelly said, go read that book. Like the amount of maintenance debt that this country has accrued over the last 50 years is astonishing. And I don't think it's something a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is going to fix, especially if a lot of that $1.2 trillion either goes towards things like renewable energy or just gets siphoned off.
How can we make sidewalks woke? I think there's probably something in there about that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. No, so freaks, if you're interested, just think about this. Go stand outside your house. Go stand on the sidewalk in front of the front door of your house. Look down and just try and wonder how much infrastructure is under your street and what does it cost to put it there. And then that's when you're going to go down a rabbit hole of like, wait a minute, there's stuff under my street. It's like, oh yes, freak. There's lots of things under your street. And I can probably guess that it hasn't been touched in 20 to 30 years, which, like, what you were talking about with the house that you rent. The thing about it this way, the way that the house that you live in was built 70 years ago is way better than the house would be built today. So you probably have copper pipes and all of these things, like the actual durable materials that are in there. The stuff that goes in the house today for plumbing is PEX. So it's basically hard plastic, and it's held together by PEX couplings. So when the Texas freeze happened, like a year ago, was that a year ago? It was 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah. So one of the major things that was happening was that like all of this PEX that they put in the houses is not rated for sub-zero temperatures or even like freezing temperatures, right? Because your water is going to freeze in the house, and then it's literally just going to pop off all of those joints, right? So your house was literally not built to handle this, and those people have to go back and replumb their entire homes Whereas like you could just replace copper if you really wanted to. But in that situation where there's plastic everywhere that falls apart, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, freaks?
No, then there's a situation if you don't even realize it's broken, or if it's just like a small break and it's just leaking into the foundation of your house. Like then you get structural problems.
Yep. Freaks, your home was not built to last more than like 25, 30 years. Unless like that comes into the high type preference stuff. You know, deals are done in real estate to turn and, you know, to essentially flip and move on. Very, very seldom, you know, even if they're building like a huge apartment complex and they sell it to like New York Life or whoever for, you know, $250 million. It's like still, they built it at the price that they could in order to move it, in order to maintain some level of control for profit at the end of the day. But, you know, it became an industry standard. So now PEX is everywhere, right? So it's just I wouldn't say it's like corner cutting, but it's like cost cutting. So I have this, I've been kicking around this idea for like a long form essay on craftsmanship and like how we got to, you know, where we were like 100 years ago to like where we are today. Like where's the craftsman? You know, I lament about that. Even the supers that I talk to lament about that. There's no craftsman left. It's like, well, what do you need a craftsman for when you can unroll a plastic tube and pop it together? You know, people don't even use brick anymore. They use veneer, and they use all sorts of labor saving techniques. So you don't even need a mason, right? You don't need a bricklayer. Where's the craftsmanship in nailing a template to a wall and then, you know, put in bricks between each little line exactly where it shows you to go. So I think 50 years of labor saving techniques and moving to lower quality goods that have, you know, allegedly the same lifespan.
Allegedly, but not, not in
allegedly,
reality.
but not. Yeah, it's just a slow degrading of quality in all of these things, you know?
Well, you're really driving home the point that real estate is a shitcoin, because what you just described is essentially like the ICO boom. Like just spin up a token cheaply, pump it, flip it, make your return. Like if that's what you're fine tuning for. I think that it seemed very similar.
I mean, sure, to some degree. I mean, yeah. The difference is it's not an air token. You know, we'll call it a brick token, right? You can go and kick it with your toe and bust your toe. It exists. It's real. And it can be repriced and so that it is a good deal, right? So, you know, I'm just in some of the research that I've done. So let's say that people are paying like 5% cap rates. So what a cap rate is that it is like the net operating income of something, and then you agree to pay X times it. So if something is a 5 cap, you're paying 20 times the income. So, you know, the cap rates for real estate, you know, 100 years ago were high teens, 20s, stuff like that. And now they're down into the 5s. And why is that? You know, cost of debt is way lower. The terms of the debt are way different. You know, if you guys think that a 30-year mortgage existed 100 years ago, you guys are crazy. You know, if you wanted to buy a house 100 years ago, you were essentially getting a commercial balloon mortgage where, you know, you had a 5-year term, you know, but at the same time, you know, that was 2.5 times your income. Now it's like 10. So, I lost my train of thought, Marty. I'm not gonna lie.
No, it's not hard to lose your train of thought when you're trying to put together all these disparate pieces and variables that explain how our world is fucked. But I do believe we're going to fix it. I believe Bitcoin's going to play an important role in that. And you were mentioning some positive, optimistic trends you were seeing in particular markets around zoning rights. What else are you seeing that is giving you some hope, some optimism about the future?
Yeah, so let's not be so dim here. And so there are, and Strong Towns is a very good example of like local communities getting together and pursuing change, we'll say. So most people don't know that land use is generally controlled. We'll say like the super alliance majority is controlled by local ordinance and state. more local than state, because the federal government or the Supreme Court ruled that in Amber v. Euclid. But what that means is that you, freak, have control over what happens in your city, and you can go and you can bitch about it and you can change the rules. So that is what is happening around the country. There's lots of great information, lots of good arguments that can be made to pursue change. So like the one that's very popular is eliminating parking minimums. So parking is one of the largest expenses that a developer has on a per unit basis when building, let's say, an apartment. So if you are a Zoomer and you want to move in to this new place, the difference, per unit may be 5 to 10% of your rent just to build that one parking space, right? And it also depends on how it's built and all this other stuff. But there's always a cost to consuming space for land, right? Whether it's underground parking or like a podium structure, kind of like the ones that we talked about earlier in Austin, or if it's just a giant, walk-up apartment like you would find here in town where, a 10-acre site, half of it is parking, right? So there's always a cost to all of these things. Now there's a push to eliminate those and reduce those costs. Now what that does is it allows for walkable urban environments to be built because you're no longer having to spend the money for the parking, and B, you don't need necessarily a car. So if I don't know what the average car payment is, but let's say it's like $500. So if you're able to build and live in an environment where you don't need one, especially in like the desert Southwest, which is like totally car dependent. If you don't need a car anymore, not only did I just save you $500 a month on a car payment, you don't need the parking space. So I just save 5 to 10% of your rent. So now we're getting into the thoughts and the cycles where it's like, okay, well now if building wealth is important in order for your future, right? Or even just having cash for a rainy day fund, which like 60% of the country has less than $500 or whatever that stat is. These numbers start to become really important. And that kind of feeds on itself because it's like, well, if you're going to eliminate parking for your apartment complex and you need to walk to get all your goods, then you need to have services within walking distance. Now, not to trigger like the WEF,
15-minute cities. Kelly's a 15-minute city guy.
So let's think about it this way. We've got to clear the record for this. So the 15-minute city is a heuristic. So that was like studies done where it basically says people will generally walk 15 minutes to get the services that they want and desire. Now, that got turned upside down by China by putting fucking gates everywhere and not letting you out unless you have a green, QR code. And then, of course, the WF is like, oh, yeah, this is great. Let's just do this everywhere. The CCP's got it figured out. So no, freaks, the 15-minute city is not some giant conspiracy theory. It was just a heuristic that basically, what's that saying where it's like as soon as a metric becomes a measure, it becomes a bad metric or something like that? Where it's like, if somebody puts together a heuristic where it's like, well, a successful urban environment has all these services within a 15-minute walk of somebody's domicile, somebody's like where they live. Then it's like, okay, then you're going to draw people to those areas. You're going to be successful in building a car minimized or even a car free environment, which is cheaper to maintain and also produces more wealth for the people that own the land, the people that live there, and for cities. So, it's unfortunate. I can't remember. I was going to read some of those. I have like 3 or 4 essays that are, in the oven for Bitcoin Urbanism. One of them briefly mentions that, but it's like they took this idea where this is kind of essentially in a complex system. This is just kind of like what happened. Mm-hmm. And then, China got a hold of it, and you got to scan your QR code in order to leave your cell block. Your cell in cell block, I mean, like your city block becomes a cell where it has all the things you need, and technically you should never be able to go. That is an abomination, no doubt. But
the West's trying to do
that kind of stuff happens.
Top down central planning and not emergent, which is what you're describing, is like the externalities of eliminating parking minimums leads to a design landscape for the architect or the person constructing where they have new parameters and they're likely to include goods and services around that design landscape that they have. Whereas WEF and China are like, no, we're going to use this to essentially police you and confine you intentionally, where what you're describing is emergent, where like what the WEF wants is like penalties if you go outside your zone and drive a car into somebody else's zone. If you do that too many times, you get dinged.
That's like that. What was that movie called? Timeless.
Yes.
Where you had to pay for your entry and time in order to go to the different tiers of the city. So I mean, I guess it would end up being the same thing where they control blocks, and in order to pass through blocks, there's some sort of fee, and you either have it or you don't, or you know somebody or you don't, and you're stuck in your little hellscape, and that's that. That becomes like a caste essentially. So yeah, no, freaks. I'm not a secret spy WEF agent. I am not Klaus Schwab, even though if you cut off the hair, who knows? But no, just kidding. But yeah, and I just I have when it comes to like urban planning and stuff like that, they try to do it like top down. Like most people don't know, when you want to build a coffee shop, let's say that you find a space. There's no parking required. You're in a nice little area. And you buy all your equipment and you show up and you want to open a coffee shop. It's like, well, sorry, pal, you forgot. You got to go to the city and get your use permit. And then you come to find that actually that area isn't zoned for that use permit. So you can't build your coffee shop there. So that plays into the issue with top-down central planning, and especially when it comes to use and like the notion of the 15-minute city. It's like, okay, well, they quote unquote know which services you need and want. Therefore, they will plan them in an urban block in the manner which suits them or which they believe suits you. And then it's copy paste. And don't forget all the security cameras and all the locks and all the gates, right? So that's like the CCP WEF version of the 15-minute city. Now that's just like a total sad ripoff off the complex emergent, version of that. But to go back to the main point is that like eliminating parking is a very important, parking minimums are a very important step in that direction, because that's really what gets the ball rolling. If you can create an environment where people don't need cars. Now, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-car. Like I'm absolutely not. They have wonderful, utility value. They perform, wonderful functions. Like I drive a big ass truck. Like you're not taking that big ass truck from me. So I get it. But at the same time, like I know that for my city to produce wealth and for land to continue to have value into the future, it has to be able to pay for itself. Parking is one of those things, especially required parking minimums are one of those things that reverses that calculation and makes it very expensive, because you have to have all of the surrounding infrastructure. Remember, like second and third order consequences. How does everybody get downtown? Well, you got to have a 10-lane freeway, both directions, like Houston does. And then they just keep adding lanes. And what does it do? It does nothing. It saves like a minute for 2 years, and then guess what? They're back to where they are. So they spend all this money on freeways, bulldozing houses in order to do that. And then what? Downtown Houston is basically a giant parking lot. And that's like another thing with like the laughs and central planning tweets. It's like I retweet these all the time. Cities from what they look like 75, 80 years ago versus what they look like now.
It's disgusting.
Like it's just totally gutted. They're just parking lots. So you had all of this wealth that existed or was being fostered over time, and then you just bulldozed it for a parking lot that is free.
Yeah. No, and this gets back to what I think was the highest signal in Chuck Marone's Strong Towns, is this concept of revenue per square foot, which obviously parking spots, most places you go, aren't paid parking. So you're taking up all this land, not getting any revenue from it. You're basically wasting all this square footage with no revenue. Whereas I think that's something we should make a push at the local level. Here in the States, if you're a freak listening to this, you want to get involved in your local community, like go to your local zoning board, whatever it may be, and say, hey, we need to shift our KPIs from whatever they may be now to revenue per square foot. Let's just like hone in on this one metric and really try to optimize that as much as possible.
Yeah. So like an example for that would be with transit departments, the metric is, in echoing Chuck Maroon, the metric is an efficiency. So like how long does it take you to get somewhere? Or how much time does something save you? Versus like the safety, which is, how safely can you get somewhere? And how safely can everyone else be on your path for you to get somewhere? So a lot of if you're changing a metric like that, it totally changes the design of transportation environments, cars, all of these things. Streets are, freaks if you're driving down like a subdivision and it's like 50 feet between the curbs on each side of the street. Like I can tell you right now, that street was not designed for you to go 25 miles an hour. Like your brain sees a wide open area and it's just like go, right? Versus a narrow street where you've got to pay more attention. Like you subconsciously slow down. So we have like this data exists. And that's one of the things that I like to include in Bitcoin urbanism is like the evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, like all of these things, like there are objective tests that can be done. So like your ugly ass building downtown that you hate, which is four walls and glass, like your brain, you can literally test, your brain ignores all of that. Versus, if you went and looked at the Texas State Capitol, like you see all these details, your brain is occupied. Subconsciously, you're not even like you may know that you're looking around, but your eye moves so fast and your brain catches so much information, visually, that like you are looking at these and it pleases your brain. So for all of you people that like modern buildings and architecture, I'm sorry, but you've been conditioned and you're essentially, you've been cucked. I'm sorry, but it's true.
You've been cucked and you're making all of our lives worse, and you're making it harder for our cities to produce revenue to actually reinvest in infrastructure and maintain.
Correct. What their original job was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Now it's about putting, whatever gender deals are, decals on the bathroom about who can be there and who can't. Just remember, they're focused on the important things, freaks. Nothing to see here.
Yeah. Let's spend hours at a board meeting talking about this and everybody's feelings instead of the blatant structural problems that exist right in front of our lives. Like, how are we gonna actually rebuild all of our stuff?
Bridges? All of our bridges that got D grades in the latest civil engineers report. No, don't worry about that. That's fine. Shh. Which gender are you today?
Yeah, all these train derailments are normal. Don't look over there.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
I hate to. That's like a glaring, like topical example of crumbling infrastructure. Because like
absolutely,
people, like East Ballantyne, obviously terrible situation, but it wasn't until that happened, and you had all this vinyl chloride leaking into the atmosphere. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. And then you look up the stats. There's like 1,700 train derailments a year on average. Yeah. It's like, what? Yeah. How is that possible? How am I only hearing about this one?
Well, I think to tie it back into like, US dollar fiat money versus like Bitcoin, remember that especially in an industry like rail, right? It's a now become like a lower margin business. Well, a low margin. It's like 3 or 4, maybe 5% returns, whatever it is. But it's like, if you are eroding the purchasing power of that money and you are in a competitive environment, you are forced to essentially cut corners, right? Or do fewer things. Now, when it gets so bad that you are not fixing the rail upon which your entire business resides or depends on, Like how do you make that work? And the answer is you can't. You can't. The infrastructure costs too much money in order to replace, and then you're basically just forced to put out 1,700 fires a year, where it's like, oh well, that line needs work, or note that, or maybe bump that up in terms of like urgency for needed repairs. But then now flip the script. Your money gains purchasing power over time, and theoretically, these costs go down because competition and technology creates cheaper products, better products, so that you can maintain your infrastructure in a, let's say, a higher grade manner over time, right? As things should be getting better instead of worse, right? It's like we're turning into like death by 1,000 cuts instead of like death in 1,000 years. Right? Things should be getting better. Things should be working better, lasting longer, up until like the 50s. That was basically the case.
And then we had just weird anomaly of the digital age coming and software driving down. You have this deflation in the area of the digital world where it really confuses people. It's like, oh, my iPhone's faster. It's cheaper. I can do things like stream over the internet for relatively low cost. Like, things are getting better, but it's just this weird point in time that we've been born in where, yes, we are reaping the benefits of software driving down costs to create things, but the physical world still does exist.
Well, think about it this way too. The digital world and the software and all of these things that we can use digitally, I think is part of like what Jeff Booth says, is that like that's literally what's kept the lid on all of this, on all of these problems. We're able to essentially lower our costs elsewhere and use what the digital environment allows us, which is essentially infinite replicability, right? Other than Bitcoin. Hell yeah. But at the same time, like that's really the only thing that's kept a lid on basically things just going to shit super fast. Like it's masked so well by the improvements in technology and what we can do with software that people think that it's like, okay, well, maybe this is just normal. And another good thread about this, Alan Farrington had a thread about basically arguing that like why, if inflation is good or bad, or why isn't technology getting expensive better, right? Like you said, your iPhone is the same price, but now it's 2 times faster, or it has all of these extra gizmos and gadgets.
You're streaming from your iPhone right now, aren't you?
Exactly. So I'm streaming from my iPhone, which is superior technology to the camera in my laptop. But they just updated the software so that I can do it literally without plugging anything into my phone, into my camera, or excuse me, plugging my phone camera into my laptop. So it's like, well, that was a step function change, My hair looks so much better. Can't you see, Marty? But it's like, how do you, if it was really the case that falling prices were going to stop consumption, why wouldn't it stop the just absolute gangbusters improvements in technology? And the answer is it doesn't, because the underlying paradigm is incorrect. So that's why we Bitcoin freaks, we're turning the world around.
We have to.
Turning it around.
We have to.
That's right. We're going to win because we have to win. What's the alternative?
All this cool technology is going to be for naught in like 20, 30 years if you literally don't have the physical infrastructure to keep all the servers and things running. Like going back to the train, like the way, like the train example, obviously very topical, but like it's so clear. Like I'm sure you saw that video of the one train in Michigan or something, and it was on that rail that was just like, holy shit.
And I must disclose that I am a rail fan, freaks. So like, I like my trains. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, seeing that one video is emblematic of kind of like what I described. Like how much does it cost to fix that rail and replace it so that they don't have to do that? And I'll tell you how it works. It is a math equation for how much the line is used, how much is transported on it from one place to another, and how much is it going to cost to repair it. So what's the speed difference between if it was a perfect rail versus that fucking wobbly, god-awful video? And the answer is it doesn't need to be repaired.
Yeah. And just like the way the monetary system is set up right now, in the long run, if something doesn't change, if we don't adopt a Bitcoin standard, all these rails are going to completely collapse, because if inflation keeps going up, there's not a cost where it makes sense to repair the rails.
Not even that. It doesn't make sense it won't make sense to pay to use the rail for what they would have to charge you just to be able to afford to replace it. So, who's going to move DVD players from DVD players.
Nobody's moving DVD players anymore.
Yeah, no. So who's moving iPhones from California to New York on a busted rail? Or if you want to replace the rail, it's going to cost you 10 times more. Sorry, don't think you're getting an iPhone.
Yeah. I mean, then you go even lower down the societal stack, like energy. I mean, this is a problem that's been very front and center over the last few years. Like Biden and crew calling the oil and gas industry greedy profiteers, but they're literally trying to eke every molecule they can out of the ground. There's not enough drilling teams in the country to provide more supply to the market. Like you have a breakdown there too, and then rates are going up, so the cost of capital is more expensive, and you get into this doom loop that we're describing right now. Like you can't even begin to approach starting a new project because it's prohibitively expensive to the interest rate environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, to merge both of, your topic and kind of what I'm talking about, like California is a perfect example of that. Like they're a net energy importer. So they're outside of Phoenix, there's a Palo Verde nuclear plant that powers a bunch of this state. But like everything, literally any spare capacity that exists, it goes straight to California. Like there is no capacity for anything else. And I've made those phone calls and I've asked, it's like, hey, you got a gigawatt or so available? Maybe I can strap some, undisclosed computers to it. But the answer is no. Like it all goes to California. So California imports all of this energy, and then they just backhand the crap out of anybody who wants to participate in the energy environment, where it's just like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But if you're already in there, like good luck getting out. So,
yeah. Well, California is going to be a great case study in just the collapse of an economy, because California, like separate from the United States, would be like a top 5 economy on the planet, and they have insane taxes, insane energy policy, insane woke policy that's eking in, and it's driving people out, the richest people that provide the most revenue to their tax base. And I think, when do they have like a decline in population of 500,000 people over the last 2 years?
Oh yeah. I mean, easy. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 500,000 and well, that'd be a lot. So yeah, probably 500,000 in 2 years. I know that Arizona, I think, has picked up 150 or 160,000 people in the last 2 years, over half of them from California. So it's just the people, the march, and I describe it this way. When it comes to putting up with bullshit from wherever you live, it is like the marginal person moves, right? So it's like that one more ordinance or rule where it's just like, I have had it, right? They're the first ones to go. It's not even that they want to go, or that they're thinking that like, wow, in 5 years this place is going to be insane. It's like, okay, no, that like the one thing new that happened, that was it. I'm moving. And like, I run into these people all the time, especially as they move to Arizona, and some of the areas that I like walk around. I just talk to neighbors. It's whatever. And
you talk to your neighbors, you freak.
I mean, technically they're not even my neighbors, because I'm walking around neighborhoods that I don't live. You gotta. These are neighborhoods where I would like to live. So you talk to those people so that they know who you are. But yeah, it's just, I've got family friends that are very high end builders, and they service California clients, and they're just like, yeah, no, I got tired of it. It was just like, oh, the one thing, I just got tired of it. It's like, It wasn't like the entire existence of everything that California, negatively does, so to speak, that was like, you put up with that, and they're like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Just one thing, I just kind of got tired of it, and now I took all my money and I paid too much for a lot or a house in Arizona, and sorry if you can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, well, that brings up the other point too. Like with this population decline in California, like who has the ability to move in the first place? It's usually people who are more well off and supplying more tax revenue to your state.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to see a jaw dropper, you got to look at the historical prices of U-Haul trailers from either LA to Phoenix or LA to Texas, and then like Northern California to Idaho, Montana, all these things. The cost to take a trailer out of California, and then the cost for that trailer to go back, or even like the truck. It's almost, I think when it got really crazy, it was 10 times more expensive to take the trailer or the truck out of California than it was to take it back. That's how much in demand, moving trucks were. And there is a U-Haul index for that. So it shows you, I'm pretty sure U-Haul is the one that publishes it. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't, but they publish the rates about where, people are moving. So that's the voting with their feet. And it's just like, there ain't a whole lot of people going to California. And so at one point they were paying people to drive stuff back to California so that they could use it as inventory for people to leave California. So just, I mean, that's just nuts. But
yeah, and then you have the big worry of people in the states where the Californians are fleeing to. Like, are they going to turn this into California? And that's
well, they try that. They try that here, and I would like to say that we've been reasonably successful in reminding people that they're no longer in fucking California. So, is it working out? And ask me in 10 years, we'll find out.
Yeah, we will. I mean, I didn't flee California. I flew the New York, fleed the New York area, came down here to Texas. And I like to think I left because I didn't like it there. I learned my lesson and will not try to bring the same policies to Texas. I see Texas as a safe haven from that madness. Yeah. And I imagine not everybody, but a good percentage of the people who are fleeing these places have the same mindset.
Yeah. What's the name? The B. Why am I forgetting? Babylon Bee. They have those videos about Californians moving to Texas or whatever. Have you seen those before?
Yeah, they have like the guns when they open the door. Like.
Yeah, and they all wear masks. That's pretty funny. But I mean, on the bonus side, people that are selecting, where they're moving to, are more likely to, I guess, espouse similar views to where their destination is, unless they're forcing because of economics. So, like a lot of people move to West Phoenix because it's a closer drive, right? They're used to driving an hour and a half to work. So if they move to Phoenix where they got to drive an hour, 45 minutes to work, and the home costs half as much, like it's a double win for them. So there is lots of that happens here, but it's just because California becomes so expensive. So the economic movers are much less likely to, at least in my experience and from the data that I've read here, they're much less likely to espouse the views of the places that they're moving to versus like, well, I'm just here because I have to be here. Yeah, damn it. Now I'm going to bring all of these things with me because I want to recreate the environment that I actually enjoyed. It's like, sorry, dude, there's no beach here. So you're going to have to figure that out.
Yeah. God, very interesting time to be alive.
Hell yeah, Marty, we're fixing everything. But I know it's, I don't want it to sound.
Can we fix it faster than it's falling apart? That's the question.
Well, how fast can you develop Lightning apps? How fast can people build on top of Bitcoin? That's the real question. So, I swear I have to be like the boy who cried wolf talking about Bitcoin mortgages, but it's like, there are options to do things differently. It's just more difficult to do in this environment. So, people are building all sorts of tools that can be used. And I always tell people, they always argue with me like, well, why on earth do we need that here? It's like, well, technically we don't right now, but like, guess what? The places for the number one usages of Bitcoin are not here, but look where that's happening. Nigeria, Vietnam, all these places where they have an option and they are exercising it. right? There's the golden ray of sunshine through the clouds. So tools are being built for people that are not worse off than we are, but are in a situation where they need the tools and the tools are working. So, Parker Lewis has an essay. It's not like Bitcoin is for everyone, but the idea is that if you do the logic where Bitcoin works for criminals, it'll work for everybody else. But if it doesn't work for criminals, it won't work for anybody, right? So if you're in a situation where your local currency is shit, but Bitcoin works, then it's going to work if your currency is good, right? All of these underlying apps and protocols that people are developing, it's if it works for them, it'll work for you. You may not be in the same situation, but if the situation were to be applied to you, you have an option. And for the history of man, there's always been very few options, or the chance to take an option. Or take
the accessibility to the option has not ever been what it is with Bitcoin right now.
Correct. Come get my node, motherfucker. So, I just think that that's so cool. Like seeing all these projects and stuff around. Like you had posted the other day about Scrib, and I'm in the process of basically moving away from Substack to Ghost and doing like the value for value thing, because it's like, well, if Substack's going to use Ghost's underlying, technology anyways, like what the fuck am I doing? I'll go somewhere else where I can, somebody can send me 25 sats or whatever for reading one of my essays. Like, how cool is that? That's pretty cool.
I think it's pretty cool. I think it's going to catch on. And yeah, like going back to your point, like if it works for people in emerging markets and you don't think you need it here, but it will work for you anyway, like that's powerful. But also with that being said, you may not think you need it here, but everything we've discussed today with inflation being out of control, the infrastructure deteriorating before our eyes, and this fiat structure really decaying the quality of life in the United States, despite all the deflation that's gone on in the tech sector. Like you may not realize it, but you do need it. You are going to need Bitcoin. Like, yes, the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world right now. It is the strongest fiat currency in the world right now. But again, it's the cleanest turd on the pile of shit. And as we've explained throughout the last hour and a half, like it doesn't seem like there's any easy outs. Like the options that Jerome Powell and the Fed and the Treasury have before them are very few. And most of them, or all of them, essentially wind up with you being more debased than you are now.
Yeah. I mean, like, and on the essay was Bitcoin is not for criminals. But and kind of like what Parker says, it's the same thing. Like you need a certain quantity of dollars for the existing system to function. But in order for the existing system to function, you have to continuously expand the quantity of credit provided. Therefore, you have to continually expand the quantity of money that you need in order for it to work. Right. So you're in this position where it's like a top. You spin the top, and then if it gets a little wobbly, you have to go and you have to spin it again. And hopefully you don't just knock it over. But it's like they're waiting to see how wobbly the top is, even though they're looking essentially in the past and it doesn't reflect what the reality is. So, these things historically do not turn out well for anybody. So you need to seriously think about what's happening, where we may be, and that, acknowledge that there is an option to literally just step outside of the sandbox. Pick a new one. Play a different game.
Choose Bitcoin, freaks. You can exit the system, exit the madness. And that's the other thing too for Westerners. Like, I don't need it. Like, again, you do need it
right now. You don't need it right now.
I think you do need it right now. I think you may not realize it, but
between me and you. But the argument's like, well, yeah, they're not thinking along a timeline. They're like, well, yeah, I mean, they're very high time preference. Like right now, yeah, of course I don't need it. Like, this is silly. My currency is just fine. It's like, well, yeah, but on a long enough timeline, even like the last 3 years, what about that? So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's okay. People are going to need it. I think what I wanted to add there is like, since it's open, since it's got these new layers coming to it, like you can build, like going back to like the utility that the tech boom and software particularly has provided us, like that's going to be playing out again on top of Bitcoin. It's like if you want to build a company, if you want to build utility, provide something productive to the world, like Bitcoin is somewhat of a tabula rasa right now that you can go build on.
Yeah, and I think that I don't really I mean, I have a Nostr account, but like I kind of generally understand what it is as far as like a messaging relay. And it's like, okay, well, here's a protocol where it's like, is it built on top of Bitcoin? Bitcoin's integrated into it, right? Through Lightning and all of the use like Zaps and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, well, what do we find here? Like, how's this concept of developing open protocols with the monetary layer literally baked into it? Like, have we turned the corner where now things are built basically where like integrating Bitcoin is like what's
primitive?
Well, right, a primitive or like an imperative,
Yeah.
right? So now like you can relay information with, posting on Nostr, and like you can receive somebody else's Bitcoin for that. Like the value that you would now have provided in a manner that can't be stopped. Somebody paid for that.
Yeah.
Like what are the second and third order effects of that? Right. Or like what can be done by running a relay for a fee, right? So long as you don't violate the golden rule that, all information across the node is valid, right? If you're not censoring anything. Like what? I just think this. I'm not technical. I couldn't program my way out of a paper bag, but like I just think that is the coolest stuff is being done, on Bitcoin and apps in order to help people around the world, or to give them a chance to communicate freely and openly. The free transmission of information, ideas, and thoughts. I just think that's the coolest thing. It's taking the Bitcoin knife fight from Twitter to a place where it literally can't be censored.
Yeah.
So I just think that just blows me away.
No, it's happening in Nostr. It's happening podcasting 2.0. Freaks will be streaming us sats. I'll leak some Scrib alpha too. DJ is working on a tool that would allow you to syndicate your Bitcoin Urbanism newsletter, not only to Ghost. You post it on Ghost, it gets auto syndicated to clients on Nostr that are reading content in that way, and it will include the paywall, where like after a paragraph or two, if you want to paywall it to read more, right on Nostr, it'll zap the paywall, and the client will release the content to the end user. So it won't only live on Ghost, you'll be able to syndicate it to any Nostr client that's presenting the content in that way.
Right, and think about like the reach, and with such like a low barrier, I guess like a low barrier to value, right? So you want to consume information that you find valuable, but the barrier is like a SAT, right? So it's super easy to pay the SAT and move on. But it's like, what I was thinking about like with Scrib and like how it applies to like newsletters, that kind of reminds me of like how Medium used to show like the most highlighted sections of somebody's essay or like whatever it is. Well, think about like somebody paying you to do that. Say like, well, this is what I really liked about your articles, this paragraph or this idea, like, and here's 10 sats for it. Like, and then like, as part of that, I'm going to tweet it out to everybody, because I think I'll send it on Nostr, rather, put it on a relay, send it to the whole world, because I think that the world values this, or I think that they will. It just blows me away. The idea that with internet native money, with Lightning on top of that the amount of value that can be provided to others, that they would be willing to send you a sat or something for it. I mean, even just the ability to do that, and the fact that somebody would do that, and that they are doing that. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, it's making me bullish. We were a bit pessimistic in the beginning of this episode and for
Well,
most of it.
you know,
but now we're turning the bull horns on.
I'm a big fan of in order to understand where you want to go, you got to know where you are. And like, shit's fucked up, freaks. I won't put any sugar on it for you. But it's like we gotta realize where we are right now, because if you don't know where you are, you don't know how to get out of where you're at, and you don't know how to get, or you don't even know where you're going. So, with all of these tools, everything changes. We're eliminating, for my part, we're eliminating a central authority's ability to dictate land use. And the only reason they can do that is because credit is centralized, and they can play all sorts of games in order to make sure that you pay your fee, right? Or that they have the power in order to do that. But it's like, the future is very bright. The future is very bright. I think for people talking about citadels and building the places that they want to have and be a part of, like that's cool. That's where we're heading.
I agree. The present may seem a bit gloomy, but the future is very bright. We have to acknowledge where we are to even begin to think about where we're going.
Absolutely. So
I don't think we could say it any more perfectly.
Sometimes, Brother Marty, just nail it and you'll leave it on a high note.
Where can we send the freaks to learn more about Bitcoin urbanism, any of these ideas you were talking about today that you plan on expanding on in the future?
All right, freaks. So I'm on Twitter at KTLANNAN and at Bitcoin Urbanism as well. I have a Substack, bitcoinurbanism.substack.com, which will be transitioned to Ghost, and it'll just be bitcoinurbanism.com. And I must note, because around here we accept 1,000% responsibility, that in BlockFi going bankrupt, I used their Bitcoin rewards credit card, and my SurveyMonkey account expired and they deleted all my data. So if you guys remember taking a survey about Bitcoin mortgages, they deleted all that.
What?
Thank you. It's my fault. Yeah. So I had hundreds of responses and they busted me down to a free account. So now I only have 40. And I was using that information to search for essentially financiers who would buy a package of essentially MBS. So like think about like a mortgage-backed security, but except with a Bitcoin as part of your collateral. So if some of the freaks know, I'm working on a Bitcoin mortgage product with another guy, and it's slow going because as soon as you say Bitcoin, people usually reach to hang up the phone. So please take the survey. If you have taken it once, please go back and take it again, because your information got deleted. But if any of you are MBS guys or know MBS guys or want to raise money for a pool of funds and aren't afraid of Bitcoin, please reach out to me, DM me, whatever. That would make the process in serving Bitcoiners and getting them mortgages much easier. And I can finally do something that I've been telling people I've been trying to do for 2 years. So I'm not the boy who cried Bitcoin mortgage and never did it. So, but otherwise, those are the places you can find me. I need to pilgrimage out to Austin for a BitDevs. Try to do that once a year, but
it's time.
Yeah, I need to do that. But otherwise, I'm on Nostr. I don't even know. Maybe I'll send you my pub key, I guess. I don't even know, like, how do you share this stuff?
We'll share your pub key in the show notes.
Sure. Share the pub key in the show notes. I'll send you some links. And then, freaks, I hope you got value out of this. And one of my favorite things I will say from the last appearance was all the tradesmen who reached out and kind of were like, yeah, I listened to this podcast with you and Marty, and you're talking about this, and I see this shit all the time. It's like that stuff really keeps me going, because I'm not one of those developers that kind of hates on all the different people showing up to my job. Everybody has a very, very important and valuable aspect of creating the built environment if you're in it, and being in a trade is not something to be ashamed of. So fuck all the haters. DM me, I will pump you up because I think that's cool. And otherwise, Marty, thank you for having me. It is an absolute blast to be here and talk to people, or I guess you particularly, who are on the same wavelength, because all of the people out here that are in real estate literally think I am batshit crazy. So happy to be here.
I don't think you're batshit crazy, Kelly. I think you're onto something.
I know you don't, Marty. You're like one of my favorite drinking buddies. So like, let's we're gonna end this on a high fun note. I'm definitely looking forward to making another pilgrimage come out. Definitely owe you a drink. And howdy to all the other people in the Unchained office today in the Bitcoin Commons, building all the cool stuff for the world.
Justin Moonham was broke in to say hello to you, but I told him to get
he did.
away.
You know what? Every time I talk to him, he keeps telling me he's going to grow a mullet, and he hasn't done it yet. So,
he has it. It's a full blown mullet.
Oh, he does.
Yes.
Oh man.
It's
well,
there.
I'm gonna have to DM him and get a photo. Otherwise, we might have to have a competition. That was always the end game for the long hair. Was I was going to do a mullet, do my best Chad linebacker in high school look. But I may be past my prime, so it may just stick with the long locks. So, but otherwise, Marty, I'll stop talking. Thank you again for having me. Absolute blast to be on TFTC.
Kelly, the pleasure was all mine. We have to make this. We can't have 2 years between recordings next time. We'll have to do this more often, maybe twice a year.
Okay, well, I'm gonna keep. I got 3 or 4 essays. I'm pulling myself out of the essay rut, and if I do a good essay, or I have a funny joke about being woke or whatever that crap is that people believe and being wrong, then more than happy to come back.
Go sign up for the Substack. Go take the Survey Monkey. What is it? Survey. Go to Bitcoin Urbanism. Substack.com.
I pinned it. Yep, I pinned it to my Twitter profile, so it's there.
All right, sweet.
Top tweet.
All right, go do all that, freaks. The future is bright. Understand where we are right now, though. Peace and love.